We can start this mother flipping podcast, Shawn Stevenson. Thank you for your patience.
Of course, yes. Have you ever done this standing? Because it felt like Neo, man. Like the room was like,
I
great.
was wondering. I was like, shoot, Shawn's doing it standing. I hope this works out.
Yeah, that was crazy. Like my heart, every heartbeat would like the room was feeling expanding and contracting.
Isn't that incredible that we have access to all of this? I've heard it from somebody else, and I've adopted the term internal technology. So much of our life is so peripheral. We're wrapped up in the cell phone's the obvious thing. It's just so darn sexy and attractive, and there's so many reasons to distract yourself. And then I think that can kind of atrophy some of those internal muscles and that internal landscape. Little bits like that I find to be very valuable. You notice that? The internal world. Do you do much exploration into that space?
Distracted from that, man. We're so pulled away. That's where all the magic's really happening. I mean, even with the external stuff, it's still all of our internal perception of all that. That's where the magic's happening. But the more we get pulled away from that, the harder this whole thing gets.
I did a Vipassana meditation thing, a retreat. It's like a 10-day thing. I'm sure you're familiar with it, and or I think you're familiar with it. If not, here's what it is: you sit and meditate a bunch for 10 days, and you go through this particular style of meditation called Vipassana meditation. In that, they refer to there's a concept, samskara, the Sanskrit word, and it means impression. And so,
are we recording our lives, right now, Aaron?
Oh yeah, we're in.
All right. 20 years, man. I've been doing this meditation retreats, 20 years. All right. Maybe, I'm sorry, 19 years, but I know.
Have you done Vipassana? Have you done Vipassana?
All of it, bro.
Oh, good. I love that. That's amazing.
Multiple day retreats, fasting, silent retreats, long ago, before it was in vogue. Yes, man. A lot of internal exploration. That's how I got here. I started doing this shit in Ferguson, Missouri, which is not a hub of meditation technology. You know what I mean?
You were definitely N of one out there.
Yeah, man. So one of my favorite meditations that really helped to change me, even my voice, is the Anahata meditation that my mother-in-law taught me. And so it's a humming. And the crazy thing is now there's this kind of like wave, James Nestor and things like that, but just like humming and nitric oxide production and all this stuff. Like I didn't know that those things were, and also, the ohm sound and the vibration and all this stuff, man. Like that's the thread of all the stuff that both of us do, you and I. It's that work in the inner technology, that inner terrain. So
the humming, you also can strengthen the muscles in the throat and the glottis and such to increase healthy tone, which can also decrease incidence of snoring and obviously just improve the quality of the tone of your voice. That's something that's interesting. Well, I was going to say with the impression thing, and because so much of what you do such an amazing job of is support people with various different facets of healing, largely through the anchor of nutrition, but obviously it's so much more than that. And that samskara concept or impression, it's like throughout our lives, we experience various different traumatic impressions. Happy impressions don't really leave so much of an imprint. It's like a feel good thing. It moves through your body. It's a beautiful experience. It's like, it's lovely. It's the ones that make you go, ugh, and you contract and you hold and you want to cry, but you don't let it out and you don't feel safe. And then you keep marching through your life, and then you build the armor and all of that. And if the body can be still for enough time and get out of the tools in the periphery, suddenly that internal technology or intelligence starts to come online. And in the Western model of medicine and science and empirical data and lab coats and all that stuff, that whole world is not completely dismissed, and it's becoming more observable and studied. But it's not quite mainstream yet. And tapping into that internal intelligence of the body, it seems like the body has a very strong affinity to heal within itself. as long as you actually allow yourself the spaciousness to listen. What do you think about that?
Number one thing, get out of the way. Just
Yeah.
create the space. Your body knows what to do. Your mind knows how to process and sort this stuff out. And
Yeah.
as soon as you said some scar, I just remembered, sometimes we can use these things to our disadvantage, even looking for them,
Mm.
like I remember, if my wife would be upset about something and, my mother-in-law would be like, it's some scar, Jerry, it's
Oh
her
yeah.
Kenyan name is Jerry. And, it's just like, it's kind of like chill out. It's just this thing, instead of
Yeah.
like create the space, allow it to
Yeah.
process. Let's not
Yeah.
finger point and villainize these things because, like you said, we're all going to be picking these things up through our lives. It's part of the process.
Yeah.
But the more that we can become graceful with ourselves, like I love that word grace a lot, but just
Hmm.
providing space and grace and patience. But we are existing in a world right now, sound like a movie, in a world that is constantly distracting us, or we're allowing ourselves to be distracted from creating that space. Because, like I
Mm.
said, number one rule, get out of the way.
Mm.
Your body knows what to do, your mind, your brain knows what to do. But if we're constantly, and there's so much, dude, there's so much going on. We've never experienced something like this before. I was just thinking about I was just thinking about being bored,
Mm.
and when I was a kid, like I had a lot of times when I was bored, and I remember like saying it, saying it out loud, saying it to my mom, saying it to a friend, like I'm bored. We don't get bored anymore. Like we don't have that space. And also that boredom is like, I know our ancestors were bored, from time to time, but it would be an evolutionary thrust of like, let me go do something constructive, right? When we get bored, we just whip our phone out,
Yeah.
right? We get bored, we just like hop on to YouTube or whatever the case might be, throw another series
We have
on.
a temporary balm to ameliorate that sensation that actually would drive us for action.
Exactly. And so what do? A lot of us end up outsourcing our greatness, our potential to, somebody else in a screen, watching other people be great
Mm.
instead of really accessing that greatness that's just welling up inside of us. We have
Yeah.
to have that time, man. We have to have time to ourselves because there's so much shit rattling around in our heads that if you don't create the space to allow this stuff to process, eventually something is going to bust. Something is going to go off and it's going to force you to slow down and to listen.
Yeah. And then that stems into something that I know that you're very enamored with, as am I, is the value of relationships to actually have physiological, structural, cellular effects on and effects on our longevity and reducing all cause mortality and cardiovascular disease and just pretty much anything that's good for the body. Having healthy relationships is positive for. I heard you mention a study from Brigham Young University. It was like a meta-analysis of 300,000 people, and the suggestion was that the healthy relationships was like a 50%. Those with healthy relationships, or the healthiest relationships, it was like a 50% decrease in cardiovascular disease and significant, or maybe it was all cause
All
mortality.
cause
Is what you said.
mortality,
Yeah,
including
all
heart
cause
disease.
mortality is the thing.
Yep.
Yeah, what
50%.
what's going on there? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do with that information?
Okay. So, and just to clarify what that means, so 150, I'm sorry, it was 148 studies in this meta analysis, over
Yeah.
300,000 study participants. People with healthy social bonds had a 50% reduction in premature death from everything. Okay.
Mm.
All cause mortality means 50% reduction in death from everything. That is crazy. There's no supplement like that. There's no treatment. There's no special class. It's our relationships. And by the way,
Yeah.
they found that this was more impactful on our health than exercise, than beating obesity, than all these other factors. It is the quality of our relationships. And what it
Yeah.
is, that's a very powerful epigenetic influence or epigenetic input because our environment is determining how our genes are getting expressed, internal and external. Again, I don't want to make the distinction between the two over and over again, but we have to, because a lot of times when we think about environment, we think about the outside world, but we are a part of that as well. We're a part of nature as well, but
Yeah.
we as humans, we see ourselves different. We go out in nature. You are nature, and
Yeah.
so this is all encompassing. This is omnipresent when I'm talking about our environment. And actually, I haven't talked about this yet, but I don't know if you know about the Dunedin study by
Mm-mm.
chance.
Mm-mm.
So this has been going on for years. Longitudinal study tracking the same people, and
Oh,
this was
The Harvard study, the longest longitudinal one, or a different
no,
one?
that's my guy Waldinger at
Okay.
Harvard, right? Which they have another really great longitudinal study. This one was
Yeah.
done by researchers in New Zealand, and they tracked from birth. All right, the test subjects coming out of the womb, track them all the way through for decades. And of course, these kids went off to all these different parts of the world, and they would fly them in, whether they moved to Costa Rica or they moved to Alaska every year, check in on their biometrics, all their data, their successes, their failures, their struggles. Some people, obviously passed away. Here's one of the craziest things found in this study that is not talked about. Yes, of course. Again, same thing, relationships, top tier of importance. But what they pointed out was how powerful our mindset is in how we age, our beliefs
Oh,
about
sure.
aging and ourselves
Yeah.
has a huge role in how we're aging and how functional and healthy we are. It's our
Yeah.
perception of ourselves and what is, quote, supposed to happen. And
Yeah.
if you think about that, it's like a very logical um, phenomenon, which is our thoughts create chemistry in our bodies. Our thoughts change what's happening in our bodies instantaneously. And I've had a
Yeah.
couple of conversations with Bruce Lipton about this. He's a cell biologist, really the person, from my perspective, who put epigenetics into popular culture, the awareness of it. And in these conversations, he kept on referring me back to when I would talk about things like nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics and how our food impacts our genetic expression, our relationships, all these things. And he's like, yeah, Shawn, but the mind first. The mind first. He always brings me back to that. He never lets me get away from it is our mind first and foremost, because our
Mm-hmm.
mind determines our perception of the food we're eating.
Yeah.
Our mind determines the perception of the quality of our relationships. We can have an awesome relationship. All right. I could be a great dad, doing all the things, love the shit out of my kids. But then, one of my kids can be like, you know what? You weren't there for me when I needed you in seventh grade. And, Billy hit me with the wiffle ball bat or whatever it is. And I just thought about wiffle ball bat because of Beastie Boys song. I don't know if you did it like this, did it like that, did it wiffle. Yeah. So anyways, but they can have a story, a perception about me as a parent that might not necessarily be advantageous for them and make them suffer because, no matter how good I am, it is their perception of me that is going to determine their outcomes. Now, here's the
Yeah.
reason why this matters and why he kept pointing me back to this. So, even in my university level biology classes and, I had nutritional science and all these different classes that I paid good money for. And I was kind of miseducated because we were missing the point on something. But we're taught this framework of DNA to RNA to protein, DNA to RNA to protein. So our proteins, like when we see each other right now, we're seeing mainly proteins that have been printed out or copies that are getting printed out based on the genetic blueprint. And what Bruce shared with me is that one epigenetic input, all right, so which could be a food, it could be a thought, can change the proteins that are getting printed. It can create up to 3,000 variations of the proteins getting printed from one gene. This is why we are all so different, why we have so much variety in our outcomes, in our temperament, in our health. It's because of how many variations can happen with which proteins are getting printed out. And so just to encapsulate all this, number one, mind first, because our mind is determining, even if we're eating, quote, bad food, what the data shows is that if you're in a high state, of happiness and, you're more in this parasympathetic state, amongst friends and feeling good, even a quote bad food will not impact you negatively or as negatively as when we tend to eat quote bad food, quote stress eating. I just threw a lot of quotes unnecessarily. Stress eating is a real phenomenon in our world today, but we tend to do that when we're stressed, and it tends to
Yeah.
add on to the stress versus the best time to eat something, extraordinary that might not be necessarily good for you is when you're in a high state, when you feel good, because your
Yeah.
perception is impacting how that food is going to interact with your cells.
Yeah.
So I hope all that makes
Do you,
sense.
do you know much around the how our mental emotional state affects assimilation and absorbability of nutrients and proteins and things of the like? Because I know that that's a thing. I just don't have enough information in my mind to say anything really super intelligent about it.
I pointed out a couple of these things in the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook, but they were subtle. Now we do have more data affirming this. I'll give you the big overarching piece, which is
And I'm trending into food. By the way, I'm taking all of this and like that we're going. I promise there's a path into
there's a
nutrition
path
and
forward.
cooking and yeah and bringing family together and things of the like.
So just to put a kind of overarching understanding of this first and foremost, our nervous system, there's really two tracks. All right. It's kind of like your computer on or off, switching over binary, parasympathetic, sympathetic. And the sympathetic, it gets this nickname fight or flight. It isn't just about that though. It is more
Yeah,
catabolic, absolutely. It's doing stuff, it's living, it's active. And if we're in too much of that and we never switch over to recovery, things can go bad. Yes, absolutely. But we need that sympathetic kind of activity. Parasympathetic has the nickname rest and digest for a reason. All right. What we see, and again, we do have published data on this, improved assimilation of nutrients, improved digestion,
yeah,
improved elimination as well. And part of this has to do with a couple of changes with certain hormones we've identified, like oxytocin. But this is the overarching look at it. Now, let's look at some of the inputs specifically. And actually, I'm going to share a specific study with you from the book because it is we have this phenomenon called stress eating, but you can also be eating stress, if that
mm,
makes sense. All right. So let
mm,
me explain what I mean by that. There is a big difference in food inputs as far as like where they're coming from,
mm,
because synthetic, newly invented versions of certain nutrients we deem to be critical for our health, like vitamin E, for example, which vitamin E is critical for our cardiovascular system, our cognitive performance, our skin health. Like it's involved in a lot of stuff. But when you get a quote multivitamin, last time I'm going to use quotes, a quote multivitamin, which I was taught in my nutritional science class, if you're going to be working with patients, always recommend people take a multivitamin. All right.
yeah. Just
And
feel
it's so
safe.
short-sighted because
Yeah,
it's synthetic versions of those nutrients. And we weren't taught. And this is where I was saying earlier that I was wildly miseducated because there's multiple forms of vitamin E, there's multiple forms of vitamin C, there's multiple forms of vitamin D, there's multiple forms of B12. The list goes on and on. It's not just one thing. So if we had this synthetic isolated version of that nutrient, is that the one that you need? And is that the one that your cells can actually utilize? And so this
mm,
particular study, this was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and it found that natural food-based vitamin E is nearly twice as bioavailable as synthetic vitamin E. All right. So like
imagine
your
that.
cell, what bioavailable means, your cells can actually use it to do cool shit. All
Yeah,
right.
they can identify it. It's like a friend that they have a rapport and relationship with comes in compared to a stranger where you're like, okay, like we can navigate this relationship, but we have some kinks to work out. We got to figure this out.
The synthetic version is like, a guy with the trench coat on. You don't know what the fuck is under there. Could be a
Yeah.
surprise. You don't know. All right. But here's the bottom line, with this kind of conversation about the state that we're in and all these kind of things. If we're bringing in fake elements or newly invented synthetic elements that we call food, but it's food like, it isn't real food. And it's going to inherently incite this sympathetic aspect of our nervous system. I don't talk about this much, but even the act of eating itself is inherently going to be stressful on our bodies. Even if the food
Sure.
is absolutely amazing, that's why you have to have this kind of grace and counterbalance. And the reason is we're taking something from the outside world and putting it into our bodies. Our 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 genes take that, our DNA takes that very seriously, because through our evolution, we put something in our mouth, we could die. Like your
Mhm.
immune system has to be front and center, ready to roll, because we don't know what this fool is putting in here right now, right? And so there is a heightened activity of our immune system that we see. But funny enough, and I mentioned this actually in my first book years ago in Sleep Smarter, I shared this really interesting study on once we venture into obesity, we see an even greater activity of our immune system after eating a meal, upwards of like 50% more immune activity, right? And it's because we already have this underlying state of inflammation that's inherently going to be higher, because our cells, our fat cells, are carrying more stuff. They're carrying more energy, and carrying energy for that long, which we never evolved doing. It is essentially sending out a false distress signal to our immune system in a way, and it's just keeping our immune system more active. It's kind of like our cells are infected, and it's just like your biology is trying to figure out, like, why is there only feast and no famine now? Like, it's just always this state. So maybe there's something wrong. So, but to put the cherry on top of this sentiment, which is, if we are more mindful of this, that this process can be stimulating for our immune system, inherently kind of inflammatory and sympathetic, do our best to put ourselves in a parasympathetic balance so that we can
Yeah.
gracefully transition. And how do we do that? Well, the research indicates one of the best ways to do that is actually sitting down, slowing down, and eating with friends, eating
Yeah.
with family, eating with
Huge.
people that you care about and like. Because I shared 4 or 5 peer-reviewed studies on the influence of our environment, specifically eating with people that we care about, and our health outcomes. And I've been out here like screaming this from the mountaintops because it should blow our minds. But at the same time, I'm still shocked that so many people are not educated about this. And I'd love to share those studies if we get a second.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's interesting as you're talking about eating with people and how it being more, inducing or trending towards being in more parasympathetic tone or favoring parasympathetic tone. If you're with people, one, you're taking your eyes into more of a panoramic focus. So you're taking your eyes probably out of your phone or out of the TV. You're like myopically focused. You're probably taking in the room. You're kind of looking around. You're feeling, connected with someone, which has all the different components of that. But also in communication, you are extending your exhalation. It's communications is a form of humming or toning. So you're activating all those vocal cords. And you're extending that exhalation, the exhalation is tied in with the parasympathetic. The inhalation is tied in with the sympathetic. Both are really valuable. But if you do a long oh hum, that's not that much different than talking for an extended period of time to someone that you care about. And so it's interesting when you start looking at kind of like the physiological effects of just being a human, and how that impacts you. And it's like, wow, if you put the body into a more parasympathetic, easeful state, suddenly you're able to digest better, which is just naturally, inherently what you do when you're just hanging out with friends or family.
And we evolved doing that.
And then
That's
you
the
could
bottom
stack
line.
that with doing it outside. And now suddenly you have sunlight on your skin. Now you're getting all these beta endorphins that are naturally induced as a product of the sun being on the skin. Now, if you're maybe taking in the panorama, maybe you're looking up into the sky. Maybe you're breathing in the various different chemicals coming off of the plants, and you're having this whole orchestra starts transpiring within yourself just by doing something as simple as, first it was with people inside. Amazing. Love everything about that. Now we stacked another variable. Now we just take our bodies outside. And it's like you can just stack these variables and make like a little health inducing variable sandwich. I think that's the
Ooh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, for me, one of the things that I tend to do is just look like, yes, we have these new innovations and that's awesome. And what has helped us to get here and to be the incredibly resilient species that we've been, that we are now is kind of devolving. But what are the things that got us here? And one of those things is we did food together. We had this
Yeah.
tribal construct. All aspects of this process were done together. We're hunting together. We're procuring food together, gathering food, preparing the food, eating together, definitely, because that was a time of lineage, of culture being passed on from one generation to the next. Before the advent of books, that's how lessons of humanity and survival and empowerment were shared with the next generation. And if you look at the definition of the word culture, culture is the shared values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors practiced by a group of people, passed on from one generation to the next. That's what it
Yeah.
is. So culture was getting passed on around food and celebration. I just came back from my first time visiting Hawaii, and I saw this dramatization of this thing that we've been doing forever in the form of this luau. And people are like, you pay money or whatever, and you're watching this, but this is how it was.
Yeah.
We've got the food that was hunted and gathered and prepared and all the things, and we're eating together and we're storytelling and dancing and celebration and music and all these things. These were inputs that our ancestors experienced for centuries, for thousands
Yeah.
of years.
Yeah.
And then we had our family structures, our tribal structure was fractured. We started to have neighborhoods. But even within that, we still had extended family within proximity. But it's further been divided where a lot of times we're not near extended family. And now, just within the last couple of decades, right, really strongly the last 20 years, we're even fractured within our own household with our nuclear family because
Sure.
everybody is on our devices,
Yeah.
right? And our devices have divided us completely. And so we're not even just divided from the people in our household, we're divided from ourselves. We're no
Yeah.
longer examining or present with our internal terrain. We're so externally focused in these portals to alternate realities,
Yeah.
And so my question was, us moving further and further apart like that, is that affecting our health outcomes? And the data indicates absolutely. And so just in the vein of food, one study was published in Nutrition Journal. This was in 2018. And they found that people who consistently eat in isolation, oftentimes in front of a screen, a device, do in fact have poor food quality and have significantly lower intake of essential nutrients that help to prevent diseases. And that, again, that's kind of a overarching discovery. But if you dig in and look even closer, some researchers at Harvard were collecting data for years on eating behaviors and family interactions. All right. And they found that people who eat together with their families on a consistent basis had significantly higher intake of essential nutrients, but specifically, they mentioned fruits and vegetables, significantly higher, and by nature, more essential nutrients that help to prevent diseases in those people. And they had less consumption of ultra processed foods, namely chips and soda. And also, they specifically noted kind of detrimental compounds in ultra processed foods that these people are not eating as much. There's something about eating together where our food choices tend to be better. This isn't all the way, always the case, by the way. But one of the reasons why is that if we know that we're having family dinner on Monday and Wednesday, like there's subconsciously, you're going to be planning that. Like we know, okay, I know we're eating together on Monday and Wednesday. So what are we eating? Right.
Yeah.
Versus like what happens a lot today. And I know this, it's happened to us many times as well. Like we'll kind of stumble in like, oh shit, it's dinner time. Like I got to feed these kids. You got all this stuff going on. And now we got DoorDash, we got Uber Eats, we got Postmates, we got so many things. And they can bring that food right to your door. Now, of course, there are food choices that are higher quality. We could do that and still sit down and eat together, which we've done many times on our
Yeah.
scheduled days to eat together. But here's why that matters practically. Like, what does the data say? Okay. And I'm going to share two studies. One of them is done on kids and the other is done on adults. All right. The one on kids was published in the journal Pediatrics. And they found that eating together with your kids 3 meals a week or more leads to significantly decreased development of obesity in those children, significantly decreased development of disordered eating in those children as well. All right. Versus kids who eat with their parents less than 3 times a week. All right. We start to see obesity and disordered eating go up precipitously. And what is that? Why is that? Again, like we'll circle back and talk about that. But as far as the adults are concerned, and there are many other studies, I'm just sharing a couple of them from the new Eat Smarter Family Cookbook. The other one is done on office workers at IBM. And what they found was that, and this was published in the journal Family and Consumer Sciences. And what they found was that as long as these tech workers were able to make it home and have dinner with their family on a consistent basis, regardless of how stressed their workload was making them, regardless of how stressful work was, stress remained negligible. They were able to basically neutralize stress, process stress, and work morale stayed high. Stress stayed manageable, and obviously productivity stayed high as well. But as soon as other obligations cut into their ability to eat dinner with their family on a consistent basis, stress levels crept up in a way that was no longer manageable. Work morale goes down. Productivity, obviously, again, goes down. They're setting themselves up for a potential problem. And what is that problem? According to a study published in JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, up to 80% of physician visits today are for stress-related diseases. Stress is like that thing. It seems invisible. I can't eat stress. I'm not necessarily smelling stress, but yeah, you can. You can eat stress. You can smell stress. Things could be, there's a whole inhalation toxicology journal, right? All of these inputs can be stressful in our bodies, and we have each of us an overall stress load, right? So psychological stressors, work stress, relationship stress, food stress, the list goes on and on. It's going to be different for each of us. But it's basically, if you think about stress and how we interact with it, a stressor, we need stress, by the way. We need stress to survive. We need stress to get better. And we put this kind of like exercise is a hormetic stressor, potentially. All right. So this is like when you exercise, you're like digging a hole. And when you allow yourself to recover, you're like adding back, covering that hole, plus a little bit more. Right. And so next time you try to dig in there, you got a higher level of resilience. And if you are actively engaging in stress and allowing your body to recover, next thing you know, you could build up a mountain. And certain shit just doesn't affect you like other people because you've been able to process that stress and make yourself a more resilient creature.
Yeah.
Now, for a lot of us, we just keep fucking digging that hole and digging that hole and digging that hole. And eventually we jump our ass in the hole, right? Because we're not allowing ourselves to process our stress. And, somebody who's in that state where they're just kind of barely getting by, like they'll dig a hole and like barely fill it back up again. And then you add on top of that, oh, you know what? I want to get fit. And I know, I think my friend got fit by training for a marathon. So I'm about to train for a marathon. That's not appropriate for you because that you add that stressor on top of all the other shit you're not dealing with, you can break the system, And so all that to say, last part, cherry on top, putting all this together, there's something healing and regenerative for us, our systems, our bodies, our minds, and our spirits, when we take the time to eat with our friends and family. Our genes expect us to do this because we evolved doing that for so long. It's a chance, and if we talk about why we see a reduction in incidence of disordered eating, for example, it's a chance for modeling behavior. It's a chance to see your significant other, to see your children, for them to see you, and even addressing that deep psychological human need to feel seen, to feel a sense of significance that so often is not getting addressed today because we're looking at other people through these screens and the comparison is just running hot as hell and not really, again, we're fighting to feel seen and to feel like we matter. And we do these very strange things just to try to get noticed, And so you're feeding that psychological need for the people in your life. And the same thing with you. When you put the devices, when you make it a phone-free zone, you guys sit down together and get real FaceTime, because a lot of our communication also, as you know this too, it's not verbal. Most of our communication is nonverbal. So you can really pick up subtleties and how the people that you care about are feeling, what's going on, and being able to address the monster while it's small versus letting it become, you know, Godzilla or whatever eventually, which is very
Yeah.
difficult to take out. You got to get King Kong on the recruitment, and then you could fuck up the whole city,
Yeah.
So yeah, so these are some of the kind of underlying reasons why this is effective. We mentioned oxytocin, the switch over to the parasympathetic, and addressing our psychological needs as well.
Yeah. So for I mean, it seems like a big part of, with the whole training, and I like the digging of a hole analogy, and then you get a little bit extra mound on top every time you do it. But it's the cyclical nature of that is the thing that's really valuable. And there's invaluable steps in that process of the refilling of that hole. And when we miss that, that's where it becomes problematic. And a lot of those steps are really super simple. They've just been largely outsourced in modernity, but it's not a problem. Like, it's actually not. I think it's so easy to romanticize the past and just like we're doing everything wrong. It's like it's like not a problem. It's just we used to walk more because we had to hunt and gather or persistence hunt or whatever we were doing, building shelter, squatting, lunging, things of the like, looking out into the distance, seeing if there's weather coming. We don't need to be as in a generalized way intelligent as we once did, because we can outsource a lot of that intelligence to technology to protect us and provide for us. But it really still comes back to like very simple values and very simple principles. It's just like, get your body outside with more regularity, take your shoes off every now and again, get around some trees, jump in a body of water, maybe get hot, maybe get cold, spend time with people that you care about, work on your internal world, work on your relationship with others and how you relate to other people, work on purpose and value and like feeling seen, feeling heard. And then really simple stuff in the realm of like food, like make sure that the food is basic things, comes from close to the ground, you could say, or the food that doesn't have a bunch of words that you don't understand the meaning of them. And it's very actually simple. And sometimes I feel a little turned off by, not from anything that you said, but in general, like the romanticizing of the past. Like, I feel like we're in it. Like, this is not nothing is a problem. EMF, Wi-Fi, just go outside, hang out by some trees. Like, it's not that as bad as I think we make. And then you can get into the conversation around like being in like food deserts and being in cities and places alike, where now in poverty, now suddenly it does become actually a more major conversation. But so all that aside, and feel free to comment on any of that, but I feel like you've commented on quite a bit of that. But the depression, anxiety, mood, I think, is a big thing. And if a person feels like they're in a dark hole, typically the general tendency is they're going to probably want to stay in that dark hole, and they're going to want to go deeper into their cell phone, and they're going to go deeper into cravings of sugars or fats or things that feel like kind of immediate gratification. Is there a path, a nutritional path, that you perhaps discuss in Eat Smarter, the cookbook that you put out, or just in your own life or research, a nutritional path towards starting to bring a person out of a hole of, say, depression or anxiety?
It's a great question. And you just gave a great, this is so profound what you just said. Actually, this ties back to the domain of physics, looking at kinetic energy, potential energy, and all those things. And like, truly, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Objects at rest
Yeah.
tend to stay at rest. We've
Yeah.
all probably experienced, it's more difficult if you've been lounging around all day, for 16 hours or on a bunch of flights. It can sometimes take more of like kind of trying to dig deep just to go out, go for a walk. And like,
Yeah.
unless it's like already cemented, this is what I'm doing, like you already have that. And when you're just in your own routine and you're able to do the things, your movement practices you usually do, it seems very easy, right? It's just, again, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. If we're talking about depression and being at rest, or going kind of like you just said, in this darkness, into this seclusion, whatever the case might be, we tend to stay there.
Yeah.
And this doesn't mean that it's wrong. This doesn't mean that, any of this stuff, like you said, romanticizing the past, we could still eat the pizza. We could still binge watch the show. We could
Yeah, it's
still,
no problem.
whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And if you want to feel good and be healthy as a human being whose genes expect certain things, you have to provide these other inputs. It's cool
Yeah.
we can have these newer inputs, but there's certain things that are required. We know
Yeah.
we know very little as a species, but we do know that certain things create conditions for better health and the prevention of disease onset, which a lot of times, and this is kind of tying full circle with the depression, a lot of these symptoms, and by the way, one of my friends, Dr. Christopher Palmer, another researcher at Harvard, psychiatrist, and he shared a study with me that was an analysis looking at long-term effects, benefits of conventional treatments for depression. And the data concluded that only about 10% of people who seek out conventional treatment, conventional, psychotherapy, medication, only about 10% have a resolution of their depression.
Wow.
10%. So 90% do not get a resolution. We
Jeez.
do see a reduction in some of the symptoms, but they're still classified at about 30% more. All right. But it's still a battle on and off. For most people, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And that's just the facts. And instead, what we do is we keep throwing these medication tipped darts at people's brains to see, like, will this thing stick? I was just talking to a parent, they just put their kid, he's on his 4th medication for anxiety. He just turned 11. And, just like, well, this one didn't work or this one worked for a while. These symptom clusters today, because of standard of care, and not only are our physicians trained to think a certain way, if they go outside of that, they can lose their license. And so they have to follow this treatment protocol if this person is presenting this symptom cluster, these type of symptoms. And then you get the label, right? This person is depressed. You have anxiety.
Yeah.
And then now that becomes your identity as well, which is a whole other scary, complicated part of this whole thing. Instead of understanding truly, going back to Bruce Lipton, and again, really father of epigenetics for popular culture in particular, getting this information. And he shared with me, and again, anybody can go and look into this data. He's like, Shawn, less than 1% of our diseases today are for true genetic defects. Most people are born with a good set of genes. What is really determining their health outcomes are their environmental influences, internal and external. Keep that in mind. That's determining what's happening with their health. And so he shared with me, because whenever we would talk about diseases, again, he'd redirect my attention. There aren't genes that code for diseases. There isn't a fucking diabetes gene. There isn't an obesity gene. Like the FTO gene was identified. Oh, this gene, so many people that have the gene are not obese. And people who don't have the gene are obese. Like one of the recent studies, actually, and if you'll allow me, I'm going to pull this study up because I want to share this. All right, here we go. Ooh, this is so good. All right. This study was published in PLOS One, Public Library of Science one of our top medical journals. The title of the study is, listen to this, drum roll please. Genetic factors are not the major causes of chronic diseases.
Sure.
This has been known. This paper's been out for about 10 years. All this great research, huge analysis, but it doesn't fit into the popular narrative, which is like, this is not your fault. None of these things have anything to do with you. You got bad genes. It's your genes. And so you are a victim. There's nothing you could do about it. And it is what it is. And I'm telling you this because that happened to me. When I was 20, I was diagnosed with this so-called incurable arthritic condition of my spine. I broke my hip at track practice. My bones were so brittle. I had severe degenerative disc disease. So much so that my spine, according to the physician, was the spine of an 80-year-old man when I was 20.
Wow.
And my disc, looking at them on the MRI, my L4, L5S1 disc were black. Okay.
Wow.
There was no juiciness. You couldn't see the light shining through them. Cut to 10 years later, my spine was younger than that of the average 30-year-old.
Crazy.
I went from debilitating pain. I'm talking like I was afraid to stand up because the pain it would go to a level 10 for half a second, but that is enough to scare the shit out of you. And so, let alone exercise, you kidding me? Going from that to deadlifting, 405, 4 plates, whatever. And all the things, man, just like all of these things that were supposed to be done, I was able to do, right? Because it wasn't my genes. I was not broken. He told me that it was incurable, right? This is something that just happens. But the reality was these inputs that I was giving my body and giving my body a chance getting out of the way, because every sip of Hawaiian punch that I was drinking was getting in the way. Every 2 for 99-cent taco from Jack in the Box was getting in the way. Every one of my toxic 24/7 thoughts, why me? Why does my life suck? Why won't anybody help me?
Yeah.
I am such a mess. I am disgusting. I am worthless. All these things that I'm battling internally are every cell is listening to that information, right? And so here's where we get the resolution and to ultimately address this. When we see a symptom present, when we have an alteration, because I'm going to shift over to depression in just a second, but diabetes is a good example. There's a recent...
They're all tied together.
Yeah.
Dis-ease eventually is going to arise in the mental emotional landscape as well, or vice versa or whatever, but it's all integrated.
Precisely. We can't make the distinction between the mind and body. That's ridiculous. It's all together in the same human. Now, there's a paper recently published and this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. All right. Top medical journal. And the paper is 200 years of diabetes. Diabetes was pretty consistent for almost all of that 200 years. Then about 40 or 50 years ago, something really strange happened. And in that time span, from then into the publishing of the paper, diabetes in our population essentially quadrupled. All right. Something happened. We could say, again, we have this diabetes gene, and that's really what it is. Or we can understand what is happening is our gene expression is changing. DNA to RNA to protein, we're printing out different proteins for different processes, and our bodies are adapting. What a disease really is at its core, if we want to reframe and look at it with more accurate perspective, it's an adaptation.
It's an adaptation
by our bodies to continue to function under unideal circumstances.
Yeah.
If we're talking about diabetes, which that unideal circumstance,
it's a massive reframe of perspective. I think that's like a really valuable perspective change of if a person is holding on to excess adipose or holding on to excess inflammation or, XYZ condition or dis-ease, instead of perceiving the body as your foe and like this stranger, and you need to reach out to some savior, to save you from yourself, essentially. Just the subtle reframe of this is information my body is communicating to me, and it's actually engaging this stimulus, whatever the thing is, as a adaptive protective mechanism to allow me to keep going forward in these unideal conditions. My body is on my team.
Yes.
It's a very different perspective.
Anything else is abandoning logic. Because our bodies, and we have this new epidemic of autoimmune conditions where, again, we're being inundated with, and there are right now, we're getting close to about 100 million Americans dealing with some form of autoimmune condition. Yeah. And it's just like, my immune system is trying to fuck me up. My own immune system is fighting me. But we know this is not new. We've had all this data on things like molecular mimicry, on conditions like, Hashimoto's and, different forms of arthritis, like the one that I had, where there's an autoimmune component to it. And we're not asking the question, why? Why is my immune system acting this way? Because that immune system, whether I believe it or not or understand it or not, help my ancestors to get to this place where I can even exist. My immune system wasn't fucking me up or my ancestors prior to now. What is happening? What's going on with my environment that's making these symptoms manifest? And so again, bottom line, and then the transition to depression, we're seeing an adaptation for our bodies to keep us alive, to continue to function under unideal circumstances.
Yeah.
And so with what we label as a mental health issue, unfortunately, when we had the serotonin theory of depression, it was disproven like 30 years ago, by the way. But now, just in 2022, we had another paper, a meta-analysis, looking at serotonin treatment and just finding, again, this is largely unsuccessful because we're looking at something in isolation, and we are remarkably complex in our chemistry as a species. And so what if we ask why? Like why are these symptoms presenting? Some things can, even though they might be more complicated to unearth or to uncover or understand, they're still there. We live in a universe of causality, cause and effect. There's always a reason why. This could be from a traumatic experience. This could be from something subtle. This could be from, a lots and lots of small cuts, right?
Yeah.
But if we don't take the time to investigate and instead seek to treat a symptom or seek to hide from the thing, we're going to continue to be in that state. We need conditions, we need support, we need love, we need attention, all the things, absolutely. But most importantly, we have to investigate. We can't just say this thing just happened. This is who I am. I am just a depressed person. I know what that's like. I know what it's like. I was by myself. I was diagnosed with a so-called incurable disease. I was supposed to be the first person in my family to graduate from college and to be successful and all these things. I had nothing. I had nobody. I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor in Ferguson, Missouri. Didn't know how I was going to pay my rent, in chronic pain. And I just, man, like I didn't really even know if I was going to keep going, to be honest. Like I just didn't know. Like, what's the point? So I know what that's like. But all of those things that I was experiencing, all those external symptoms, and I'm just going to be honest with you, for everybody who's experiencing that state, it was all leading me back to me and to my gift, to my greatness.
Yep.
To all of this, we all have so much beauty within us. But a lot of times we don't have that beauty without contrast. We don't even know what it is. And so some of the most remarkable people go through the most challenging things. And if we just attach to the story and we attach to the bad thing, we never get a chance to investigate and to ask a higher quality question, which was, for me, what changed everything was I asked a couple of things. One of them, instead of why me, I asked, what can I do? What can I do to feel better? That was the first domino. Eventually, that question became, how can I be the healthiest person in the world? Something completely ridiculous and audacious, but it started to change my perspective. And it landed me, again, shooting for the moon, landed me amongst the stars kind of thing, but also asking, what is this depression trying to teach me? What is this trying to teach me? Because I have the answer. No fucking body outside of myself can tell me. Nobody has the answer but me. So people can help me to maybe investigate and ask certain questions, but the answer is within me. The condition is within me. We've been so disempowered to keep seeking outside of ourselves for our wellness. And so asking, what is this depression trying to teach me? And again, an audacious question, what is the gift in this?
Yeah.
What is the gift in this? And having the audacity and the courage to step into that, to walk forward into that, because I promise you, life is so much more wonderful than we acknowledge a lot of times because we get caught in our thing. But also, we don't want to leave here with all these gifts that we've been innate. They might be dormant within us, but we don't want to leave here with these gifts still inside of us.
Yeah. It feels like, I mean, that analogy of a relationship seems really apparent, where if you're in a relationship with someone, maybe like a romantic relationship or mother, child, whatever, there'll be certain signals that will arise in if there is some miscommunication, or there's parts that haven't been of that person where they don't feel quote unquote seen or heard, and they feel maybe left out, or they feel like there's some part that they're just not being listened to. And it might not, depending upon the quality of communication that you have between the two partners, if you have deep trust and you have effective communication skills, you probably won't have as many inflammatory blowups. You might have little skirmishes, some stuff happens, but then you tend to it. I think it's the same thing with the relationship a person has with their body, and the body is attempting to communicate these different things. And if you are not listening, those small scale skirmishes will start to turn into battles, and those battles will start to turn into wars. And then eventually it's like there's blood and flames, and it's just like this whole thing. And you're like, and now at the root of that, there was just actually something that wanted to be heard, or some subtle shift. That it started off as just this little creature just kind of lurking around, like, hey, like, here I am. And then eventually it's a monster. But it comes down into listening. And I think that listening also could be, you seem like an esoteric kind of metaphysical listening in the sense of, mindfulness or meditation or taking some journey to Peru or whatever. But also listening could be seeing a physical therapist or seeing a manual therapist, or going to get an MRI, going to get an X-ray, going to get blood work, going to get study your stool, study your saliva, like all of that. You're gathering data, and you're saying like, okay, like, body, I'm here for you. I'm listening, and I'm meditating, and I'm actually using that internal technology. But like, there's a lot of different angles of listening. If the concept of mindfulness makes anyone uncomfortable, which I'm sure nobody listening to this would, but there's a lot of listening out there.
Yeah. Once we get to that place where the monster is wrecking the city, it's very difficult if it's happening within us, for us to be like, this monster has a root. Like there's at that point, we're just like, this is total destruction. Don't tell me about taking a fucking walk like
Yeah,
that.
right.
It's like, that's not going to help me. Can't you
Yeah.
see the city is getting destroyed?
Yeah.
Right. And to give an example specifically, even talking about walking as a little bit of a joke, but matter of fact, there was a huge meta-analysis published in the BMJ. This was 1,039 studies looking at conventional treatments for depression, psychotherapy, drugs, and exercise.
Yeah, exercise is a big one.
All right. 1,039 studies published in the British Medical Journal, top 5 medical journal, top 5 dead or alive. All right. Here's what they found. These researchers found that exercise was 1.5 times more effective at bringing about a resolution to depressive symptoms than drugs or conventional psychotherapy. Not to negate, even as I said this multiple times, not to negate where their benefit can be with drugs, with psychotherapy. But the data, one of the biggest, most robust set of data ever compiled, says exercise just works better. It just does.
Yeah.
Now, here's where all this matters. Are you doing it? When we're trying to, again, give me the drug, or I need to, usually if we're working with good, even as you mentioned, physical therapy, right? Usually when we're working with a practitioner, if they're really good at what they do, they're pointing us back to, as a city's getting destroyed, this realization that, oh, wow, like there is a root to this, right? But it's still bringing us back to ourselves when we get caught up in, this is unstoppable, you don't understand.
Yeah.
And so what can tend to happen when we hear even that a very affirmative study like that is, well, I exercise every day, but I'm still depressed. There's a couple of things here. Number one, where would you be without the exercise? Probably worse. Number two, this does not say that exercise solves everything completely. That's silly pants. Because what we're looking at is stacking conditions in your favor, making sure that we are addressing the inputs of the mind and body that code for that express health or the state that we feel better in. And we've also got to understand, like, for example, somebody could have that comeback, that whataboutism. Well, I'm still, depressed. What is your relationship? What does your relationship with yourself look like? What is your relationship with other people? What does your
Yeah.
sleep look like?
What was your relationship with stress look
What
like?
is your relationship with stress, your perception? What does your
Yeah.
nutrition look like? Right? What is your sense of purpose? Do you feel like you are doing what you were born to do, what you feel good about? Like, are there things that are out of alignment? Because this society today, sometimes we can get caught up in this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but your spirit could be yelling at you that no,
Yeah.
you're a dancer. Like
Yeah.
that is what makes you feel alive. But society has told you that you need to work in, this particular office and you need to do this job, whatever, because it's safe, right? So we've got to address the other parts of you, which you're a complex, beautiful, incredible human being. Start checking those boxes, make sure we're addressing those things. And what tends to happen 99% of the time is the depressive symptoms start to alleviate. And if there is a monster beneath all of this, it starts to present. And we
Yeah.
start to see it with more clarity, with more patience, with a renewed sense of being able to actually process this thing, reframe it, and let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. We got to wrap up soon. Is it okay if there's a couple quick questions that I'd love to ask if it's all right. We got like 5 minutes.
Let's do it.
All right. First thing that I'm curious about, something that I heard you recently talking about was inflammation of the hypothalamus, and that being associated to belly fat and inflammation, I'm sure, throughout the whole body with the brain, which would tie into everything that we're talking about. What are some remedies for reducing said inflammation? And I wonder, I think also within that, I think I heard you mentioning something around olive oil. I'm very interested in like the health benefits of olive oil, because I'm Greek and like
Mhm.
general, Western European mutt. And I happily will drink a gallon of olive oil in a week. I don't probably actually do that, but if I did, it would be a good week. And much of what I've learned growing up is like that would be a big problem. That's probably a gallon of olive oil a week. I'm not condoning that or whatever, but that might not be the ideal. But what are the benefits of olive oil, and is that tied into inflammation of said hypothalamus as a potential remedy for that?
Great question. So, with the implications with neuroinflammation, so brain inflammation, again, this is tied in deeply to symptoms of depression. But is your practitioner telling you that? We have a pretty substantial set of data right now indicating how inflammation is playing a huge role in mental health challenges. But is anybody putting a strategy together to reduce inflammation in your brain? Again, probably not. Part of the issue is the brain is very protective. It's hard to get a peak. Even when we're getting diagnosed with a depressive condition or another mental health category of condition, it's not based on any analysis except a conversation or some behaviors. They're not doing blood work. They're not looking at your testosterone. They're not looking at what your thyroid's doing. They're not looking at your neurotransmitters. They might say you have a serotonin imbalance, right? Or, but are they checking? That's very hard to do, by the way, to check serotonin. And so it's just like this crazy system based on guessing.
Yeah.
Not even educated guessing, by the way. So I'm saying all that to say that's the mental health side, but on the metabolic, like physical health side. So researchers at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine have uncovered that hypothalamic inflammation specifically is now directly causative, not just connected, but causative of more body fat accumulation and insulin resistance downstream. Why is that? The hypothalamus, this master gland in our brain, is the integration of our nervous system and our endocrine system, our hormones. And it's kind of like, this is, if you're looking for who's controlling my metabolism, like where's the computer station? Where's the guy in the van determining like how many calories I'm burning a day versus, the next person? That location is in the hypothalamus. So that is why we see these metabolic disruptions. And deeply, again, tied in with the thyroid as well, all the things that's all existing on the HPA axis. And so, but here's the rub. They found that excessive amounts of belly fat and body fat lead, and insulin resistance leads to more inflammation in the brain, in the hypothalamus. So that it becomes this vicious circle. Inflammation is creating downstream belly fat's creating more upstream inflammation in my brain. I'm trapped. This is part of the struggle that a lot of people are experiencing trying to lose weight with conventional means. We're not addressing the fire that's happening in our brain, specifically the hypothalamus. What's causing the fire? We have to remove that. All right. Ultra processed foods are a huge part of this equation. In particular, the excessive amounts of sugar, because our brain, the blood-brain barrier, has a tremendous amount of sugar gates for like speed access, and allowing a lot of sugar in has been found to, again, create insulin resistance in the brain, which is type 3 diabetes, is one of the names that it's getting for Alzheimer's, by the way. But your brain, this is from researchers at Harvard, will gladly confiscate 50% of the sugar you just consumed from any given beverage or food, because we evolved in a certain way. When we would access some sugar, some carbohydrates in nature, your brain requires a lot of energy. It's 2% of your body's mass, but it can use upwards of 20%, 25% of the calories you consume. It is crazy. It's crazy, specifically glucose. So now we're getting this insane amount, just one 20-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola. Like, when I was a kid, I did this all the time. We're talking 16 teaspoons of sugar, 16, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the orange juice is, we can't even say that it's better. It's 14 teaspoons in the same 20-ounce bottle, right? So it's just like all this sugar we never would have came across is creating inflammation in the brain and tearing down, in particular, the hypothalamus. So remove the cause. Ultra-processed foods, big issue with that. What are some things we can add in to accelerate it? You already mentioned it. Crazy enough, olive oil. I don't have any dog in the fight. I don't care if it's olive oil. I don't care if it's, I don't know. I don't care if it's freaking
bacon bits.
Bacon bits, yeah. I don't care if it's honey nut Cheerio oil. I don't care. The data shows that our ancestors figured something out a long time ago. Extending an olive branch, creating peace, right? It's happening within our bodies. Olives and olive oil does something special. So this is from researchers at Auburn. They found that olive oil, oleocanthal rich, this antioxidant rich, extra virgin olive oil, it's cold processed, as it's been traditionally, can actually help to repair the blood-brain barrier and stop that kind of excessive breakdown of this protective mechanism that's keeping out things that are creating more inflammation in the brain. So I mentioned ultra-processed food, but it's not just the sugar, by the way. It's all of these synthetic, newly invented chemicals that is tearing our brain apart. Yeah. All right. And so olive oil is one. Also, and I identified a couple more of these, but another really interesting one, which is a popular food today, is broccoli. Right. So broccoli has these really unique compounds that have been found to help to reduce inflammation in the brain, funny enough. And it's called a head of broccoli, interestingly, but there's some compounds in there that are pretty remarkable. Another one is spirulina. And spirulina has been a protein source for, countless human civilizations for thousands of years. Chad, the country of Chad in Africa, Aztecs, Mayans, the list goes on and on. Very dense protein food. But here's the thing. If we're talking about 70% protein by weight, just about, but it doesn't weigh a lot. So that can't be your predominant protein source, but more so, there are these very unique compounds um, that have been found, that have been identified in spirulina, like phycocyanin, for example, that has been found to stimulate stem cell genesis in the human body. Like
Hmm.
I mentioned, I think I said honey nut Cheerio oil or something. Honey nut Cheerios can't do that shit. It can't stimulate stem cell production. Spirulina can. It's really, really cool. But here's what it's all about. At the end of the day, we find out about these cool things, but then what? What do we do with it? What do I do with spirulina? It's kind of weird. It's kind of gross. Should I just eat it? So in the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook, we've identified about 40 of the most science-backed food for improving our metabolic health, our sleep quality, our mental health. You get all the studies right there, but you don't even need to read the studies. I literally boil it down to emojis. We have an emoji culture. It's so if I share that study on the benefit with cognitive function and brain health, it's a little brain emoji right by that food, and then we have the associated recipe. So one of the recipes with spirulina, for example, is a speedy superfood guacamole. And I'm telling you, I'm a
That's a good idea.
foodie. All right, we're about that life. We just love food. It is delicious. My friend Lewis Howes, who a lot of folks might know, he's got one of the top shows out there, School of Greatness. He had tried guacamole one time, didn't like it before he ever came over to our house. And we were having tacos, and I was like, you want some guac or whatever? He was like, nah, I don't like it. Guess what? He tried the superfood guacamole. He tore that shit up. All right, changed his life, and ever since. And listen, his girlfriend is from Mexico. Lewis is in salsa clubs in freaking Bangladesh and like all these like exotic places. He didn't touch guacamole though until he had it with me. All right. So, and with that said, by the way, another one of these really remarkable foods that's again, it's out here on the streets heavy now is sweet potatoes. It has some really special anthocyanins that have been found to directly act upon the memory center of our brains. All
Yep.
right, the hippocampus. Cool. Baked sweet potato, awesome. But guess what we did? Sweet potato pancakes, sweet potato protein pancakes to increase the protein fraction so that it's a more balanced, even for our blood glucose perspective. But also, again, we get to enjoy the process of having these delicious foods,
Yeah.
And so that's one of those things where my kids, like we make a big batch and we can freeze it so that my youngest son, when he's getting ready for school, he could just grab some out of the freezer, warm them up, give himself some fruit. Wow, like he can enjoy the process, enjoy delicious foods, and that's what it's really all about.
I love that. The other night, 2 nights ago, we made sweet potato chips for nachos. Made like this big nacho plate and made a little sweet potato chip thing in the bottom. It's very nice. I appreciate you so much, man. I really greatly value your capacity to blend the esoteric with the scientific, and the mind and the body and the heart and the soul and the like, be able to integrate all that and be able to present all of that information in a digestible way. And I'm so grateful for you to have created the most recent book, Eat Smarter, your cookbook. I'm so glad that you finally did a cookbook. I feel like if there's anybody that I'd want to have a cookbook from, I think it'd be you. So I really appreciate you putting it out there, man, and making time for this. What's the best, since we got to wrap up, what's the best direction for people to go from here?
So I just found out earlier today, Publishers Weekly bestseller, USA Today national bestseller. We're about to put on the cover. It was the top cookbook in the country this past week,
Nice, man.
and
Congratulations.
that's nuts. Like they're like quote celebrity chefs. I said I wasn't gonna say quote anymore, but one last celebrity chefs and all these things. There's something special about this that is
Yeah.
like kind of galvanizing and getting this movement going because it's about more than just delicious food, which again, that should be a huge part of our livelihood and our connection.
Yeah.
But it's about the education component and the empowerment, and getting families and friends together and helping to heal the divide so that we can have healthier conversations so that we can start to feel good. There's this common tenet we talk about that people that if we're looking at not doing well, oftentimes we don't do well because we don't feel well. And we
Sure.
could do some extraordinary things in under terrible circumstances, suffering, for example, but it's just harder. It's a lot harder. So um, I'm very proud of this. And actually, because of the book rising so quickly in popularity, Amazon just I just found this out yesterday as well. They just dropped the price of the cookbook by 20% on Amazon.
Amazing.
So you can pop over to Amazon and take advantage of that. It's called the Eat Smarter Family Cookbook. And of course, you could support your local bookstores, Barnes and Noble. We want to keep our local bookstores open. We want to keep Barnes and Noble open. It's a vibe going to a bookstore and hanging out. So I definitely support that as well. So, but just anywhere that books are sold, you could find this. And I'm telling you now, it's going to be a staple in your kitchen. You know, it's such a great resource. It's a beautiful book. And that's what we're seeing, you know, from all the people that are sharing out there on social media. Is like people get this cookbook and it just becomes a staple because not only is this delicious food, high quality food that parents are going to enjoy, but kids love it as well. And that was the mission, to be all encompassing, all inviting for everybody. It took a lot of work to create something like that for sure. And I'm grateful because I really feel like we did it.
Oh, well, I think you did it. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate getting to have this conversation. I look forward to the next time. That is it. That is all. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you next week. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. If you did, feel free to tag a part of it. You can tag me at Aaron Alexander on Instagram. Recently changed the handle from Align Podcast to Aaron Alexander. That was a long process of procuring that mofo, but we were able to get it, which is cool, convenient. So you can tag me at Aaron Alexander. You can also tag Shawn at Shawn Model, I believe is his Instagram handle. And feel free to jump over to the Align Podcast YouTube channel. Subscribe over there so you get each week's videos. That is it. That is all. Thank you all. I'll see you next week.